challenges and policy imperatives, especially in COVID era. Of course, we will be discussing for even in general for vaccines also. This is being organized to celebrate National Science Day. That was actually yesterday, February 28th, a Sunday, basically to mark the discovery of the Raman effect by our legendary Indian physicist Dr. Sir C.V. Raman, and the first Indian scientist to win the Nobel Prize. We are fortunate to have a very distinguished panel of speakers today, including our DGCSIR, Dr. Shekhar Mande, our own Director of NISTADS and NISCARE, Dr. Ranjana Agarwal, Senior Advisor in the Office of PSA, Dr. Shailaja Vaidya Gupta, Dr. Rajiv Dhere from Serum Institute of India. Of course, in the last minute, he said he had some health emergencies. He won't be able to attend. Just 10 minutes back, I got both, so I requested him if he can nominate somebody. So maybe hopefully somebody should join in his place. And Dr. Varshney from DST and Dr. Geeta Vani Raisam from CSR headquarters. And also Dr. Shirshendu Mukherjee from BIRAC. Initially, I mean, there's some program is clashing with ours, but he kindly agreed to join us. Maybe he will leave early, but it's nice that he could join. So today's topic on vaccine policy is of great contemporary relevance, not only because of ongoing COVID-19 vaccination globally, but also for vaccines as a whole. In fact, the topic is particularly close to my heart as I have established this field from scratch right here in NISTADS over the last 25 years. Therefore, I must sincerely thank my director, Dr. Ranjana Agarwal, for her leadership and initiative on this topic and for the opportunity she gave me to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you again, ma'am. May I now request you to deliver your welcome address and opening remarks. Ma'am, you are not audible. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhvi. Dear Dr. Shekhar Mande, DG CSIR and Secretary DSIR, Dr. Shailaja Vaidya Gupta, Senior Advisor, Office of PSA, Dr. Anurag Agarwal, Director CSIR IGIB, Dr. Rajiv Dhere from Serum Institute, Dr. Mukherjee from BIRAC, Dr. Geeta Vani Raisam, Head Science Communication and Dissemination CSIR, Dr. S.K. Varshney, Advisor and Head International Cooperation Division DST, members from NISTADS and NISCARE family, organizers of this event, Dr. Madhvi, Parmanand, Dr. Prasanna, distinguished guests who are joining us across the different laboratories and our partners. Dear students and friends from media, I welcome you all to this policy dialogue on COVID-19 vaccine, from self-reliance to global leadership opportunity, challenges and policy imperatives in COVID era as part of our National Science Day celebrations. I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Mande for accepting our request to be the chief guest on this occasion and also giving his views on the topic which is very dear to him. Dr. Mande's vision and dedication to lead the CSIR from the front, particularly in the time of COVID-19, has been remarkable. His constant support and encouragement to NISTADS and NISCARE, which is now going to be an merged entity, NISPER, National Institute of Science, Communication and Policy Research, motivate us to undertake studies and programs that highlight the S&T interventions for the welfare of the society at large. I welcome you, Dr. Mande, and seek your guidance in our future endeavors too. Today, we have with us Dr. Anurag Agarwal, Shailaja Vaidya, Dr. Rajiv, Dr. Mukherjee, Dr. Varshney, and Dr. Geeta Vani. We are really fortunate to have an active engagement of these expert panelists with us who have been working in mitigation of COVID-19 in India in different capacity. So basically we will be able to hear their views, like how the things are moving, how the vaccine developed, how it is being supplied not only in India but in international scenario also, what is the public perspective. All these issues will be discussed today. So I welcome all the dignitaries and thank them for sparing their valuable time out of their busy schedule. As Madhvi said, that CSIR-NISTADS is a policy research think tank that undertakes evidence-based policy studies on science, technology, innovation with an interdisciplinary perspective. Therefore, it was envisaged in May 2020 when the COVID, the institutions started opening up and we joined. We thought of organizing collective intelligence series to develop focused policy documents on the opportunities and challenges of COVID-19 for India that can strengthen the government's efforts. So therefore, NISTADS, in collaboration with different knowledge partners, is hosting a series of panel discussions, workshops, seminars to bring in thought leaders, professionals, and eminent experts at a common platform. This exercise is expected to provide clarity, understanding, and a clear direction towards bringing out focused policy documents. The key themes and topics which we have undertaken are environment, energy, digital infrastructure, rural enterprise, creations, strengthening healthcare system, agriculture practices, transportation, and urban infrastructure. For the last 25 years, I am very pleased to share with you that NISTADS has been undertaking outstanding research on vaccine science, technology, innovation, and policy-related studies. When it comes to research output on vaccine STS from CSIR NISTADS, it has been recognized as a single source of information nationally and internationally on all aspects of vaccine STS for research and evidence-based policies. Therefore, today's policy dialogue on COVID-19 vaccine is a part of the collective intelligence series conceptualized by NISPER to address the challenges posed by COVID-19 to healthcare system. As we all know, this pandemic has shaken the whole world. The whole world is struggling to deal with this coronavirus outbreaks. Initially, the world leaders were confident of handling the situation like they did in the case of SARS, MERS, or H1N1. However, it has been observed that COVID-19 is a different virus, rather unpredictable virus. So it does not appear to conform to any known pattern or rules. A more complete understanding of the virus and its effects are still to be understood properly. It has overwhelmed the healthcare capacities of even well-resourced nation. But when we look at the close readings of recent global discussions on these issues, they underscore that India can play a very influential role in mitigation of COVID-19. And fortunately, India has proved that it has risen to the occasion. In 1 year, the pandemic, since it began, relentless efforts of scientists, technologists, regulators with government support have culminated into indigenous COVID-19 vaccine development production, and we are able to distribute it since January, not only for domestic needs, but also we are exporting it to more than 20 countries, including our neighbors. Thus, a new window of opportunity has emerged for India to address the critical gaps, particularly in healthcare system, by exploiting the opportunities to make it Atmanirbhar. Today's policy dialogue intends to bring different stakeholders from industry, R&D organizations, policymakers, innovators, science communicators, together to discuss opportunity and challenges, technological interventions from national and international perspective that can be useful for addressing the opportunities and challenges of COVID-19 vaccine to make India self-reliant and a global leader. The discussion will be free-flowing, structured brainstorming for about 2 hours anchored around the above issues. I believe that through this intellectual discussion session, we will be able to suggest policy framework to improve health infrastructure, strengthening industry academia collaborations, boost for vaccine R&D funding, capacity building for vaccine production, international cooperation, and many more. I once again extend a very warm welcome to all the dignitaries and participants and hope you will enjoy the discussion. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, ma'am, for your warm welcome and opening remarks. May I now request our TZ Dr. Shekhar Mande to deliver his inaugural address. Dr. Shekhar Mande.
Thank you, Madhvi. Thank you so very much. First of all, my apologies to all of you that I joined 10 minutes late, and I promise that I will make it up by speaking very less. So I will not speak very much. Secondly, it's good to see so many old friends here, Shailaja, Vaishnavi, Shirshendu, and of course our very close colleagues and friends Anurag and Geeta on this particular platform. And thirdly, let me thank Ranjana for organizing this such an exciting talk. It could not have been more topical today than the Honorable Prime Minister himself taking the first jab of the vaccine. And I would like to inform everyone very proudly that the jab that Prime Minister has taken, CSR has played a tiny little role in that, in a sense that the adjuvant that has gone into the Bharat Biotech vaccine Covaxin is made in CSIR. So we are very proud that IICT Hyderabad has prepared this adjuvant and given it to Bharat Biotech, and Bharat Biotech is now routinely using this adjuvant in the vaccine that is there. So as Madhvi was saying, Ranjana also mentioned that CSIR has very actively participated in all COVID related issues, mitigation strategies in a 360-degree view. And you are still going to see in the coming time continuous innovations that are coming out, whether be it Feluda test kit, whether be it more than 5,000 genome sequences, whether be it Zero Survey Pan CSIR, Pan India, whether be it sewage sampling survey, whether be it air sampling survey, whether be it ventilators, Swasthavayu, whether be it rapidly deployable hospitals, and now the solutions that will allow us to open our schools and colleges and malls and everything, the room cleaning solution, and measuring the viability of virus which remains suspended in air. These are just around the corner. The last solution is just around the corner, is being actively tested today on today's date in CSIR's auditorium, and hopefully in the next 1 week or so it will be rolled out for the public. But as for the vaccination, we're very proud that today what Honorable Prime Minister took a jab had also CSIR adjuvant in it, and we are very proud of this particular development. And I do hope that we have very productive discussions in the meeting today to celebrate the National Science Day. Thank you very much for inviting me, and welcome everyone to the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your apt and very appropriate inaugural address. And also for strong support to our work at NISTADS. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable time. Shall we begin our panel discussion to get deeper into insights into today? Topics from various stakeholders now. In order to make it more interactive and brainstorming, we have divided into 3 rounds of discussion. In the first round will be the panelists will be flagging important issues. Each panelist will be flagging important issues in 2 minutes each. And rest of them also, if any brief comment is there, can respond immediately, or at the end of the all the comments by all the panelists, it can also be discussed. And the second round shall be moderated discussion, in which each panelist responds to 2 minutes each to the specific points of the discussion made by the moderator. And the third round will be to discuss queries from the audience. We request the audience to post their questions in the chat box within the next 1 hour, so that related questions can be combined and meaningful discussion can be held. Now we can begin the first round. In fact, I thought of beginning with Dr. Anurag Agarwal, but Dr. Sirshendu Mukherjee, if you have to leave early, how much time you have?
Dr. Madhvi, you can start with Anurag, I think, and you can start with Anurag. I am here for some time, so you can start with Anurag and then I can.
Yeah, epidemiology comes first, so I thought we can start with Dr. Anurag Agarwal. I request Dr. Anurag Agarwal, Director of the CSR Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, to flag the scientific issues for vaccine policy, especially epidemiology and vaccine development in 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to keep this brief so that we can have more discussion. This is not the first pandemic the world has faced. It is not even the largest pandemic the world has faced. About 100 years ago, the Spanish flu swept through the world, infected about 1/3 of the world population, and led to 50 million deaths. What has changed from them to now? We have the ability to make vaccines. We have the ability to provide better care to people who fall sick. And we've been lucky that the degree of sickness per person infected for this particular infection has been, of course, worse than a normal cold, but not as bad as we thought initially. Now, how does a pandemic end? A pandemic ends in only one way. People become immune. How do they become immune? They can start with immunity even before the pandemic. That has not been much of a case here, but there might be 20–30% of the population that have seen similar viruses and may react appropriately. Number two, you can become immune by getting infected and recovering. And third, you can get immune by getting a vaccine. Now, when you look at India, you look at our sero surveys, the total number of cases, known cases, is far below the reality. The sero surveys in August and September had a crude positivity rate near 10%. The January sero surveys by ICMR are showing around 20%. For this country, it means 300 million people have probably been infected. The ICMR sero survey was a random sero survey. Most districts of India are rural. In cities, you're looking at 40–60% of people being infected. When does herd immunity come? Herd immunity comes probably, best estimate, around 70–80% people having immunity. And herd immunity is best thought of as community level immunities for all practical purposes. Within a community of people interacting with each other, how many percent have immunity? And India can get the rest of the distance by following vaccination strictly. That's the most important message for today. Even in cities, you are not there. Perhaps within some communities, you may be there. In communities that have reached more than 50–60% positivity after 7 to 8 months, the immunity gets lost and it comes back. Manaus, Brazil is the best example. If you want long-lasting immunity, have to go for vaccines. It comes in 3 flavors. mRNA, the biggest new technology in the world, not yet available in India, but technologically the biggest advance we have seen. DNA vaccines available, and kill virus vaccines, very well established, safe, and Covishield and Covaxin are respectively the 2 types. And strains, the virus will evolve, build your immunity, go forward. I'll take more questions as they come later.
If any panelists have any brief comment to make, maybe they are welcome now for 1 minute, I mean brief comment. Otherwise, we can also discuss it. And maybe I'll go ahead with inviting Dr. Shailja Gupta from Office of PSA to provide the public or government's perspective on vaccines and flag relevant issues within 2–3 minutes.
So Madhvi is giving me actually a very difficult task to give a public's perspective on the COVID vaccine. And for a country as vast and complex and diverse as India, to give the public's mind is a lot of responsibility and a very difficult thing to do. But having said that, if you look at the survey of the Edelman Trust Barometer 2021, In their survey, they indicated that Indians have the most trust in COVID vaccines. Almost 80% Indians are willing to get vaccinated within 1 year. This is larger than the trust Brazil has, Mexico has, China has, and the other developed countries, Australia, UK, Canada, US, Russia. It is the largest number of citizens who have the trust in COVID vaccine, and and they are willing to get vaccinated. And the trust also stems from our systems, our government, and it is well established. So the trust is there. For us, from the government, that so much of trust is there, and now that the Prime Minister himself has got vaccinated at AIIMS, also re-emphasizes the trust of a vaccine made in India. It is immense, that the kind of trust that has been generated. The trust now must be leveraged by the government, and it must be leveraged by creating systems which are more transparent and which are more accessible to the ecosystem. When we have been part of the PMO constituted task force for the coronavirus vaccine. One of the biggest challenges which we faced was the lack of data in public, and the criticism which we received was the lack of data in the public domain and the lack of transparency in the public domain. And this is something which we should not, it is something which we should tackle, and it should be our biggest flag, the lack of transparency and the accessibility of data in a public domain. It is imperative that we do that because the vaccine which are now available in January could have been available to us maybe 3 months or 4 months prior to this, if we had the data sharing and the regulatory process, transparent regulatory process in place. If we had, and we would have been so much ahead of the timelines, which we are now doing. We did an excellent job. The industry was terrific, and we got the vaccine out there. But we could have, I think, this is my personal view, I think we could have done it 3 or 4 months earlier. The decentralization of the regulatory process was another thing which was flagged, and I think it is very important to flag it here also. And once we decentralize, that we should also trust the scientists. Finally, it's the scientists who will deliver. So the government also needs to trust the scientists with data and information and the regulatory process for them to be able to deliver. And I think this pandemic and our Indian response to the pandemic has huge learnings, and one of it is that the trust from with the private sector, with the government systems, with the public is so important to have a successful solution in place very quickly. And this it is the trust which has allowed this rollout of the vaccine so quickly. But we must leverage this trust. We must make our systems more transparent and more decentralized and share data more readily and more generously, and we'll be there. I will take questions or responses to this later.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. And I think Dr. Rajiv Dere hasn't joined us yet. Maybe I will now Dr. Sirshendu Mukherjee to flag the issues related to national and international cooperation, academia, industrial linkages, and BIRAC's role in it. Dr. Mukherjee.
Thank you, Dr. Madhvi, our most respected Dr. Mande, DG CSIR, Dr. Anjana, Director SNAD, Dr. Madhvi, and my esteemed panelists here today. I think it's my privilege an honor to be with the part of these esteemed panelists today and share my thoughts. And what an apt day to have this discussion. Firstly, the National Science Day, which went yesterday, and today the mass vaccination rollout starting with the Honorable Prime Minister leading it by taking a Made in India vaccine. So I think what an apt day to have this discussion. Dr. Madhavi, you have given me 2 minutes and to talk about the cooperation, the national as well as international. I think I'll take a step back. If we rewind our memories, say around March, April last year when this pandemic started, the entire innovation ecosystem in India, I think, stood up to that expectations, and led by all our funding agencies, DBT, DST, CSIR, ICMR and others, I think created that enabling infrastructure, and led by PSA's office, created that enabling infrastructure so that the innovation in the academic institutes really come up to a level, talk to an industry, and start working on innovation, not only on vaccines, but starting with enabling things like the ventilators to diagnostics to working on therapeutics, and then to vaccines. I think entire innovation ecosystem geared up, and thanks to the academic community, the startup community, and the innovation ecosystem in India, which really came up with, we really started when we were importing a lot of PPE kits, sanitizers, and thermal scanners, ventilators. We started exporting it, and that is what the our academic, scientific, and the innovators community stood to. We showed the world that we can lead in innovation development globally, and thanks to all our funding agencies to do that. Coming to the national and international cooperations which you talked about, I think our academic institutions and the agencies, the funding agencies in India, really have spread across the ring, across nationally, talking to each other, creating that innovation and farming innovation so that these innovations can be plucked and used into our national system. It was a very fast cycle to move from proof of concept to really validate that and bring to the market. And that was really because of the partnerships. The academics works very closely with the industry worked very closely with the regulators to bring the things to the market which are at an affordable and accessible way. So that was the big thing which is, and thanks to all the institutions which brought it. In the national, internationally, we worked very closely, and I don't need to say, but I think with international philanthropic agencies like the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, the CEPI, all worked very closely to work on the vaccine development. The strains which were available and which were tested outside India were brought to India with the companies, and the facilitation was done with the national systems so that they can be developed. The bridging studies could be done and taken to a level. So I think that was possible because of the catalytic nature which the government provided, the platforms which the government provided, the handholding which we gave, and that really helped us to provide that ecosystem to that. So I think that was really very important, and we provided our incubators, worked up to the gave that platform, and we have almost 30 vaccine candidates right now in various stages of development in there, so that I think not only 2 or 3, but slowly we'll roll out and we'll be happy to deliver very affordable and accessible vaccine to our country, and not only in India but around the globe. The global community is looking to us for vaccines, which are, and this is thanks to the cooperation which the national scientific community worked together, and internationally we got all the support from the academic institutes around the world to take it forward. I'll stop there, Dr. Madhavi, and come back to any questions if they are available.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Varshney to say briefly about vaccine diplomacy in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Madhavi ji, for this invitation. And I would be talking more on the vaccine diplomacy. And idea is, if we could tell that, you see, Anurag and Shishendu has mentioned that we are the global hub of generic medicines, covering nearly 20% of the global demand, and 60% of the vaccines are done in India. which shows how confident we are and how Atmanirbhar we are in this thing. And this has provided us an opportunity that during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we could supply the world not only hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, but also several tools to combat against the COVID, which are diagnostic kits, ventilators, masks, gloves, and other medical supplies. And according to one estimate, India has spent more than $16 million on therapeutics, test kit, and other medical equipment for about 90 countries, which we have supplied. And as all of us know, that presently two vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin, are available for use in India after the required emergency use approval. And according to our minister, there are 7 other candidate vaccines which are in pipeline, which will give us more opportunities, make it more easier for our populations. And why our vaccines are more popular? Because they are easy to store. Unlike mRNA vaccine, which requires ultra low temperatures, our vaccines could be kept at a regular refrigeration condition of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. And what we have done in order to make use, we have done 2 more steps. One, we have supported temporary suspension of COVID-19 vaccine IP rights. And that allows us to go for fair and equitable access to the global community for this. And second, we have set up this National Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID-19, which provides export clearances after ensuring that there are adequate number of vaccines for our own citizens. And whom we are targeting? We are targeting those countries which are either least developing or developing countries. We are targeting countries like those which have who have not invested into vaccine research, and they are not intending to produce vaccine at home. So that is our first target. Of course, we would go again. And as far as today is concerned, we have supplied nearly 6 million doses of anti-COVID vaccine as a gift to needy countries. 10 million commercial units have been supplied to various countries in West Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we would be supplying in near future to even developed countries like Canada and Saudi Arabia. And what we have agreed that we would also be supplying to UN health workers and WHO workers our vaccines. So that is in turn how after ensuring our own requirements, we are supplying it to the global community. So this is in a brief. I would like to stop it here and take more questions as and when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Geeta Vani Raisam from CSR headquarters to flag the issues pertaining to science communication and awareness within 2-3 minutes. Dr. Geeta.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Madhavi, for giving me this opportunity to talk about the science communication and awareness. And I think, firstly, congratulations to you and Dr. Ranjana for choosing this wonderful topic, which is highly relevant at this time. And so the science communication and awareness, I think it goes without saying how important it is during this crisis of COVID-19. And I think all the initiatives, be it the vaccines or be it the drugs or the social distancing, are not effective unless people follow it or people are ready to take it. And therein comes the issue of awareness and science communication, I think. All our efforts will be futile if the public doesn't buy in whatever the resources and the tools that are available. And we have seen that this pandemic, the best solution is social distancing. And for that, you need the partnership from the public at large. And that partnership is going to come only by increasing the awareness and the communication to them. And I think if you see globally, those countries who have really been consistently messaging about the public health awareness or the science communication, they have done reasonably well as compared to those countries which haven't been doing it so. And we are fortunate that in India, I think right in the beginning, our Honorable PM has really led the campaign on awareness by talking about it each and every platform and by doing various awareness camps. And even today we are talking about how we led by example by taking the vaccine. And I think these acts of awareness are very, very critical in really getting out of this pandemic. And I think and India has been really very innovative. And I think most of us recall on the mobile, we hear Amitabh Bachchan talking about and giving us the message to use a mask, or now it's about taking the vaccine. And I think these are really effective means of communication, which really India has utilized it efficiently. However, this pandemic is really challenging. For all the good news, we also have the so-called WhatsApp University or the infodemic, which is proven to be a larger problem than the pandemic itself. Because for every positive news, there are a lot of false news which are being spread, and that is really going to set back our efforts. I think so. It's this fight between the positive news or the authentic news, if I may say so. And I think here there is a large role for the scientific community and the scientists and the health community to come out and really spread this message of positive news, and not only positive, authentic information. And it's a highly complex area because there's not much known, and still after a year we are much better placed than what we were in the last March. We hardly knew anything about the virus, and going to the public and discussing and knowing and when the research is emerging, first of all, people were not sure whether masks are useful or not, for example. And then, giving the right message in this kind of a pandemic situation is very challenging. And I think so. These are the challenges which really need to be addressed. And this may not be the last pandemic. And so the lessons we learned today from this pandemic will be really useful for the going forward and seeing how we can leverage this learnings we have during this pandemic, and how we can use it for a better awareness in the community. And last point I would like to say is that there have been many challenges, but there has been a tremendous opportunity as well, I think, for the scientific community, because the interest of the public in science is tremendous. Rarely I have seen headlines screaming day after day after the scientific discoveries. And I think so it's upon the scientific community to leverage this advantage and keep the public engaged in the science going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Geeta. Now, if there are any comments or any responses, I would like to invite from all the panelists. If anybody has any comment to make or respond on any of the issues which were flagged by the panelists, are welcome.
I'll ask Dr. Agarwal a question. And Anurag, I did say that, and that was my personal opinion, that we could have compressed the timeline of having the vaccine out in the market if we had our structures in place, whether it was clinical trial sites, whether it was a sharing and availability of data, whether it was decentralization of the regulatory process. Do you think that is the right assessment?
I agree with you, actually. I fully agree with you.
I think we could have been the first.
We have been a high quality clinical trial nation.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be brutally frank on it.
Yes.
Very few large clinical trials on anything ever get published from here. And CROs of India, when they have to do a complicated trial, they actually go outside. In fact, drug companies of India, if they need to do a complicated trial, they go outside the country.
Yes.
We have our unique challenges on why that is so. So I will not say that that's a simple problem to solve. I'll give you the simplest, and the simplest is that you cannot give any incentives in India to participants of trials. Now, when you're in the US, I mean, they give incentives left, right, and center for people to participate.
Yes.
And here it becomes an exploitation of poor situation, which is not incorrect. So we have to find our balance, like in many other areas, where there are challenges on every side, because no matter what you do, exploitation of poor always becomes a challenge which limits rollouts of innovative products and ideas. And that is something we need to figure out how to do better.
Yes, so actually this has been this is, I think, a major lesson which we need to learn and find a solution if we want, if our next pandemic is to hit, and it will probably, if we don't learn from what of course we did a lot right. I think 70% of us went right, but the 30%, if we can do it, we can actually lead in a lot of our response, lead the world in the response. Managing a complex and diverse country like India is not easy, but we still did it, but we could have been so much better.
Yes, we did well, but yes, there was plenty of scope for improvement in particular areas. And part of the reason we did well was clearly luck. If the mortality per infected case had been anywhere compared to the rest of the world, we would have been. In fact, I was giving a talk earlier this morning that, when Hopkins had to withdraw that statement from their labs over there regarding 250 million or 350 million people will get infected, they had to then withdraw, saying dissociate from it. As we come to January 2021, well, the number is pretty much that, except that they were wrong in saying that people would die in exceedingly high numbers. And that's a mistake they made. But, we've not been successful in containing the spread of the virus. We've been very successful in building up our systems to take care of large number of infected people and to build up our systems to the point that India has more vaccines to administer than number of people to administer them.
Right from the beginning, our response has been terrific. I look at my relatives and my friends across the world, whether in the US or the UK, testing is not so easy for them. Getting themselves tested is not so easy for them, and it is expensive. Here I see tests, RT-PCR tests being available to whole spectrum of population and economic spread. Everybody from my domestic help to I can get RT-PCR tests done almost overnight at very minimal costs. And most of my friends and relatives in the US and UK are shocked at this easy accessibility and the affordability of this test. I think in that we have been commendable, and I think our institutes such as yours have a huge role to play right in the beginning. And I think the vaccine task force, and if you will recall the very first meeting which we had at the PSA chair, where you were the first person and with the PSA said, okay, make it available. Let us all use all the RT-PCR machines available in the country to get this test done. We will do it. And I think that was the first trigger to having the tests being available right in the beginning. So I think there was much to congratulate us about, but much to despair as well, because we could have been leaders in this one event.
The comment by Winston Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we did that well. But yes, in general, if you look at healthcare overall, and you look at healthcare delivery structures, you look at ability to see a doctor in 48 hours if you don't have a medical emergency that will take you to an emergency room. India in general, whether it be being able to see a doctor, whether being able to quickly get a test done, has actually been miles ahead of both North America as well as Europe. Our challenge has typically been in quality control. And our other challenge has been in the fact that it's the private, and I'm going to say this very clearly, it is the innovative private sector of India that is responsible for most of these things being easy. Genuinely speaking, when I say that somebody in India can easily get a test done or easily get, to see a doctor in 48 hours, what do I really mean? Do I mean that they can easily get to see a doctor for a reasonable amount of time in 48 hours in the government system? Can they see it in the private system? So India has a pretty vibrant mix, but then money always becomes an issue. And that brings us back to the usual problem of exploitation and discrimination. We have to have such strict rules because if somebody were to fall ill, 70% of them would be paying out of pocket into the private healthcare system. If everybody was getting, good quality, free of cost, high quality healthcare anywhere in the country, we won't have to worry so much, would we? So it goes round and round.
Does anybody in the audience want to ask questions?
May I? May I?
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
I would like to continue with the comments made by Dr. Shailja Vaidya about the availability and sharing of data. I do believe that this played a very crucial role when we come to the vaccination part, because the whole country was waiting eagerly, like when the vaccine is going to come, but when it came, and as Dr. Geeta also said, like it's infodemic. But I think the experts in the field were creating so many discussions at so many platforms that the public at large was apprehensive initially, like whether we are going for the safe vaccination or we are made guinea pigs. So what to do with that? Because I don't want to name the experts of the field, but like you go to the news channels and there were debates about the safety of the vaccine, and particularly the one which our Honorable Prime Minister took today. So what to do with that? So that was one of the things I would like to raise. And the second thing to Dr. Agarwal, because you have been involved with the Sero from the very beginning surveillance, and I truly appreciate your efforts, the way you have carried out the whole program. So after your observation, what do you feel like once a person is vaccinated, how long it's going to work? Because again, there is an anxiety in the society, like how long it's going to work. Are we be needing annual shots or something like that? So like this kind of information I would like to have from the experts. Thank you.
Okay, complicated one, but let me see how one addresses this. So the debate you're talking about is the emergency use approval given to Covaxin in a clinical trial mode, which many people construed as using people as guinea pigs. Many people said where is the problem, and then there were lots of poorly informed debates happening in the public side. But if you actually read carefully what was written by the experts, there wasn't much disagreement between what they were saying. You had an indigenously developed vaccine for which antibody data was available. So it was likely to be effective, but not proven to be effective. You had a country of 1 billion plus people, and we were already a bit late in getting vaccination started. And we had a window in which things would be quiet, and we could, if we use that window well, quickly get the vaccination program rolling out, covering everybody. Now the decision in such things comes down to this: is it safe? And if it is safe, is it effective? The safety seemed okay because plenty of people had been immunized. The question was really effectiveness. Now, going by historical precedent of killed vaccines, it was very similar to Sinovac of China. And we had some data for Sinovac, so it was likely to be effective. So the committee gave it approval in a clinical trial mode, which basically means people are undergoing a trial, except it's not a trial of placebo-controlled trial. It is simply got enough people given the placebo in the past. Now you're going to put them in trial. And every one of them had to sign a form. That form said, we are participating in a trial. We do not know that the product is effective. So actually there is no confusion. That's what everybody was saying, no? whether it be so I don't think the people spread any misinformation. They were simply pointing out that all people receiving it are participating in a trial. That is all that we actually did. And you do trials only when you believe something is likely to be effective. You don't get to that stage unless you believe there's a likelihood of effectiveness. And I would say there was a very strong likelihood. A well-developed platform, clearly immunogenic, similar level of antibodies protecting people from getting disease, but how effective we do not know. And that's where we are. And if you look at even members of the committee, so for example, Dr. Guleria had mentioned that this would be a backup because the other one is proven to be effective, but then there was some thing that the bridging trials may not be complete on that. So basically, for both of them, we expected them to be effective. For one of them, there was more data. For one of them, there was less data. Rest, to be very honest, is a matter of policy. Scientifically, what I just said captures the situation very clearly. Then it becomes a matter of policy, palatability, implementability. And Shailaja, I'm sure, has sat through even more discussion than I have on that particular topic. So back to you, Shailaja.
I will come from the people's perspective, and I think it's okay for people to question anything the government does. And it is important that they question. I mean, why should we even question, doubt or question their right to question? I mean, it is a democracy. They might have doubts. They might think they're guinea pigs in a trial. And that is what I said. You have to be a little more transparent in the data which you're sharing, in the information you're sharing. And I think it is perfectly okay for the democracy to question people. And if they have doubts, it is our duty as government people, as policymakers to, settle those doubts. And if we can't do that, I mean, we are not doing our duty as policymakers. We cannot have a policy which doesn't answer 10 different questions of the general population. So in my mind, I thought it was okay to question. And in my mind, it was also okay for the government to take the decision they took, because they have a complex and a diverse country to deal with. And these were the options they had, and they went right ahead. It had its risks, but I think it played off in the run. Even then, the risks were minimal. And Anurag just said that given the options which we had and the risks, which the effectiveness of the only thing which was questionable, not the safety of the vaccine, the effectiveness of the vaccine was in question. So given that, even if it was 50% effective, it was an risk worth taking. But as it turns out that it is a little bit more effective than 50%, and we will have the more full data available in maybe a week's time, or I don't know. Anurag would have more information on that. I think questioning is okay. It's but I think the wrong information which goes out because of the questioning, that is something which we need to be careful about. The fake news is something which we need to be careful about. And the questioning the intent of the government needs to be, we need to be careful about. I don't think the government has anything but the best of the citizens in mind when they do these things. They are not playing with anybody's lives. They're just trying their best to save lives. So that is a question. That is a message which needs to go down there carefully. And all these people have been working day and night, whether it's Dr. Anurag Agarwal, whether it's Dr. Shekhar Mande, whether it's other leadership in science and technology. None of them would want a vaccine out there which is not safe enough. So I think that message was conveyed very categorically. The effectiveness was a question, but that also has been settled now.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we can, because time is running short, shall we go ahead with the second round? If there are no any other brief comments.
We have a second round, Madhuri?
Round now. I'm going to put questions to you all. Some, then I think there maybe in the end again we will discuss whatever answers and responses. And again, I wanted to start with Dr. Anurag Agarwal, but I'll ask if Dr. Mukherjee is still there. Maybe I can ask him if he wants to. I think he's already left, looks like. Anyway, then I think I'll start with Dr. Anurag Agarwal. You are as a director of CSR Institute of Genomics that specializes in respiratory disorders as one of its main mandates. What do you think CSR in general and your institute in particular can contribute towards Atmanirbhar? And one more question, in particular, what is the role of genomics in meeting the challenges associated with mutation-prone retroviruses, as we are already witnessing in some of the states in the ongoing pandemic? The third question is, do you think the current level of public investment in epidemiology is adequate? If not, is it better to enhance the public investment to the required level, or can it be safely left to the private sector?
Let me start answering them in the reverse order because they get simpler in that direction. So last one, is the public investment in epidemiology sufficient? No. The fact remains that every year in the Terai region, we have deaths of unknown origins, and we haven't quite settled the matter. Same thing happens in deeply forested regions in the south, outbreaks occur. So yes, we need more investment into infectious diseases, known like tuberculosis as well as unknown. For known for problems like MDR, and for unknown because they're unknown, we should not leave too many infectious diseases unknown for too long. They could become the next pandemic. Now coming to the second one about genomics and its importance. Now, the only solution that you would get is not always going to be from conventional epidemiology. It'll be from molecular epidemiology. So times have changed that, so there's never any substitute for conventional epidemiology, but there is an added on layer of molecular epidemiology that allows you to use sequencing as your Sherlock Holmes lens, allows you to quickly discard things that are known, quickly find things that are unknown. And let me explain this to you. If I were to do a test for an unknown pathogen, how would I do it? The entire reason it's unknown is because it's unknown. So I can't possibly have a test for it immediately. But with sequencing, you can. I can sequence anything whether I know its sequence or not. If I want to do a PCR for it, I need to know its sequence. But I can go in with random primer sequencing of an infected person who has died, come up with a brand new sequence of a brand new organism the world has never seen before. And that's how SARS-CoV-2 was discovered. So if you look at the timeline, December 1, first case, end of December recognition, they're looking at a spreading pneumonia, first week of January 2020, sequencing done over a weekend, spread on virological.org. By January 12, the sequence available globally. By end of January 2020, diagnostics ready to go. From some people, mRNA vaccine work started. Now, where would any of this be possible without genomics? So, genomics is critical to the new age of molecular epidemiology, and institutes which have expertise in sequencing are as necessary to fighting these things as institutes with experience in viruses and epidemiology. You can't, you can't assume that if institutes strong in virology would be equally strong in sequencing, and people working together is the best way of handling things. Now to the first question, the most difficult one. How do we contribute to Atmanirbharta? See, Atmanirbharta to my mind is not necessarily about products or Make in India. Atmanirbharta starts all the way from having sufficient knowledge within our own country to respond to our own needs in a timely manner. I could choose to speak about some products that we CSR have made for the pandemic. There are many, but that's not what I will choose to say. I will choose to say that we at Atmanirbharta, from the point of view of the knowledge economy required to make everything else possible. Everything else is secondary. In-house knowledge building to solve our own problems is the biggest type of Atmanirbharta, and I will stop there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Shall we go on to next panelist and shall we discuss again in the end? I think that's better. I think that way we will save time, I suppose. So now I will go ahead with Dr. Shailaja Gupta. With your long experience in DBT, with an objective of self-reliance in vaccines. In fact, earlier there was some problem of this WHO CGMP problem. Now that it has resolved in public sector, now they have become public, WHO GMP compliant. In the century-old our vaccine public sector institutions, as well as two public sector companies set up by DBT, BIPCOL and IVCOL. IVCOL anyway it has to be, because of want of technology, it could not go ahead. But BIPCOL was fully GMP compliant, but yet we were not utilizing those manufacturing facilities for our production. We only repackaging it. That's one thing. So given this background, so I would like to ask you, whether there is a role for public sector for Atmanirbharta? Can it play a legitimate role in setting a price deterrent and to spearhead biosecurity, which is an important issue even in the West now? The role of public sector as insurance in the forefront. Do you see public sector has any legitimate role? Like for example, we make our own, there are three ways of making own vaccines. One is you make it completely develop indigenously. Another is contract manufacturing, where exactly a public sector equivalent of Serum Institute is doing currently. And third is, use compulsory licensing, the way we have helped in Africa by supplying the HIV drugs to South Africa. So that is, these are the three options. But do you see any role for public sector for realizing any way? Can it play any better, any way, any legitimate role or meaningful role?
Madhvi, I will. This is actually I'm from the government. I was in DBT. I'm no longer in DBT. It's a very conflicted answer which I will give. But I will go to what the Prime Minister recently said, and I completely empathize with what he says. I'm completely in sync with what he says. Babus cannot do everything. We cannot manufacture vaccines. We cannot manufacture airplanes. We should not be in that place. It is not our place to be. And having said that, I agree that no, public sectors cannot and should not be manufacturing vaccines. We should be looking out to the private sector. Private sector is part of India. Why do we think private sector is not part of India? They are here, they are building the nation, they are contributing to the nation as much as the government is doing. Why are we we think of them as outsiders? Why is it that the private sector is thought of someone who is exploiting this country and the Babus are not? Babus, I'll refrain. I'll refrain. I'm in a public domain. So, okay. So having said that, we have to have more trust in each other. Yes, public sectors also can manufacture vaccines, and they can. We still are into the certification. The Central Drug Laboratory in Kasauli is the only lab which actually certifies the manufacturing capacity of the private sector, and which is again incorrect. We should have 10 of them across the country. The private sector cannot be dependent on 1 or 2 regulatory nodes for every certification which they need, any regulatory process clearances which they need. So having said that, we know WIPCOL is again, like you said, just a coming together of assembly or assembling products and getting them together. We could have done a better job, but apparently there are problems and there are issues, primarily because of the expertise, the lack of expertise within our own systems. And the lack of manpower. If we look at WIPCOL, which is being managed by DBT, is being managed by one officer who's also dealing with 10 different things. And how do you expect that person to do justice to a manufacturing industry supposed to be of a magnitude of WIPCOL? It doesn't work. We are hamstrung by the lack of expertise and the lack of human resource. So we have to go out. We have to go out and work with the private sector with trust and respect, and the coming together of the private sector, the government, and our academia was one example of a combined trust and respect of each other, which led to the delivery of so many products during the pandemic. And that needs to continue. We have to have respect. If the government thinks we can do it all without the support of the private sector, we are living in an ivory tower or our own la-la land. And we need to reach out. And for a country which has 1.3 billion people, the government is very hamstrung with the lack of expertise and the lack of human resource who are able to deliver. So it is imperative and critical that we reach out to the private sector and get things done. Otherwise, we'll just do a little bit and we'll never, it'll be, what do you say, a linear growth. It can never be exponential. If we are looking at exponential growths, we have to reach out to the industry. And Anurag knows, has been saying that, and it is, he knows IGIB would not have been able to do what it was able to do during the pandemic if the industry hadn't come forth.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, I have a small clarity. When I asked you this question, I didn't mean that I have any, sides against per private sector.
But it is first
with private sector as well as public sector. I'm only saying that how can we leverage the existing strengths from both public and private sector? Can we have synergize them, the strengths we have both?
Yes, pandemic actually brought all these strengths together. The synergy was brought together to have so many products, not only the vaccine, the ventilators, the PPEs, the N90, the testing kits, Faludas of the world came out because of this synergy of public and private sector. And this is a lesson very well learned during the pandemic, and this needs to be taken forward. Even the masks, it was a simple thing, but everybody the industry just took it as their own, and we had all kinds of masks, cloth masks coming out into the market, and they were there. So it was just the government catering for masks would not have been possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And actually, Dr. Rajiv Dhire, he couldn't join or he could not also send anybody so far. I haven't got any response. Shall I move on to now? Dr. Mukherjee is also not there, I think. Maybe I'll move on to Dr. Varshney now. Dr. Varshney, India is a scientific and technological superpower in South Asia. In much of the developing world after China. At a time when some developed countries have been hoarding vaccines, India's vaccine supply to many countries in the world has set a stellar example. This is in line with our long cherished history of international cooperation for scientific solutions, be it in energy, space, biodiversity, environment, IT, agriculture, or medicine. Yet, none of the Indian embassies employ scientists, nor do our diplomats make the best use of India's soft power in science and technology in their routine diplomacy. India is also not very proactive in piloting science-led environmental solutions in the United Nations. The only honorable exception was the two resolutions piloted by India in 2019 on sustainable nitrogen management and single-use. This was mainly due to the leadership of our Science Minister, Dr. Harshvardhan, who was also then the Minister of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. So in this scenario, how can we build the vaccine diplomacy towards science-enabled, if not science-led diplomacy, to harvest Indian scientific talent spread worldwide and build a lasting influence on the world stage? Don't you think a lot of that is lying unutilized? How can we, do much more than this?
Thank you, madam. I could hear your question partially, not very clearly, but and I will agree with you also partially that science diplomacy has always been part of our global negotiations, whether it is climate or whether it is 123 nuclear deal or major things. If you see in recent past, even several alliances have come up. For example, International Solar Alliance, Mission Innovations, and earlier we had like AIDS initiative. How are we eradicating malaria and polio? So what I'm trying to say, that science has been part of diplomacy. And even today, for our energy crisis, we are much dependent on such deals. But what I will agree with you is that most of our diplomats are not science savvy. So the way they get graduated into cultural relations, into trade relations, or political relations, of course, they are trained first. They are not as much into the science. But for last several years, especially after the nuclear deal 123, we have realized that science has to be the core of diplomacy, and it is no more a soft power. It is now going to become one of the strongest tools in our negotiations. So whenever we are talking about any security, whether it is food security, energy security, water security, climate research, science is going to play a major role. And now there are stronger discussions on what science can do for diplomacy and also what diplomacy can do for science. So it's now examples are both ways. And of course, if you talk about scientific personnel per se, we have got countable few scientists posted in our embassies, as posted by Department of Science and Technology, Department of Space, Atomic Energy. So these are countable few. But that awareness among the new diplomat is being coming, and any new diplomats which are now being recruited in last 5 years, 6 years, a chapter on science diplomacy is given to them. So they are being trained on these subjects, and I'm sure that tomorrow political dialogue would be not only on trade deals but on techno-commercial deals. We would be taking science to the front position as far as our negotiations starts, and once there is a political proximity, then we could go for science technology collaboration. But again, there are certain parameters, because while science is global in nature, technology is not, and we have to find appropriate marketplace for that. So there may be, some of us may be good competitor, good rival, and many of them would like to go together. So there is a change in the perception how science is being viewed by the diplomats, and we see tomorrow it would be a two-way transactions where science would be helping our diplomats, and diplomats would be doing their work driven by science. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Exactly, that's what I was actually. It's a good news. Like I was told many times when these negotiations go on, UN negotiations, most of the time scientists are not associated with, along with the diplomats to advise. So very few are there. So that's the my concern. Like we should have more scientists also along with the diplomats so that we can take it forward.
It's not a question.
Which you have already mentioned now.
Yeah, it's not a question of whether scientists are being associated in person or not. It's more of a question whether our issues are being discussed, are raised, and are taken to the political fora. And if you see in recent past, whatever the global partnership has been, whether it is with European Union or United Kingdom or United States, science has been the principal agent. And if you see the joint statement which are coming up after the visit of two heads of states, you will find good mention of science.
Thank you, sir.
Also, Dr. Varshney, I want to add one of the ambassadors, and this is in confidence in a public forum, that the MOUs which the Science Ministry sign are one of the few MOUs which actually have an action taken report, and they are actually implemented on ground. So that also because a lot of work is done after a follow-up, as a follow-up of the MOU which is signed, or the joint statements which are made, that a lot of confidence has been generated with our own science departments and agencies. So they have worked very hard to create that confidence. So yes, science diplomacy has worked for India, I think.
Anybody has any other comment, brief comment, or shall I go ahead with Dr. Geeta Vani? I think I cannot see we are really missing Dr. Rajiv Dhire. If he was there, maybe he could have given us industry perspective. I think now I'll go to, even Dr. Mukherjee is also not there. So Dr. Geeta Vani, I'm asking, communicating science is always a challenge in a country as diverse as ours. Yet we witnessed unprecedented public appetite for scientific information during the pandemic, overcoming even waves of blind faith and pseudoscience. Do you think that the COVID experience has enhanced public trust in science and created conditions for more constructive engagement and rational discourse? Can we expect the media to reinvent its honeymoon with science in 1980s that lasted only a decade and remained marginal since then? How do you see the science communication that raises above these challenges? How do you make science engagement with people uniform with more diverse culture like India? Of course, you have already, while flagging the issue, mentioned about many of these things. You have covered it. Maybe you can elaborate more on this.
Thank you, Dr. Madhvi. I think you have raised very pertinent questions, and I do not know whether I have answers and solutions to all of the questions. But with my limited experience and during the pandemic, you are absolutely right. And at least as a scientist, I am delighted at the interest in the public. At least in my lifetime, I couldn't think of genomics in the front page of be it Hindu or be it Times of India. And seeing our DG CSIR on NDTV every day, I think scientists are superstars now. I keep telling him that you are a rock star of Indian science, be it Anthony Fauci or the respect. I think scientists, I think it's long overdue, if I can say that. I think scientists have been the unsung heroes, and this pandemic has really put them out upfront. And I think we should all be glad as a scientist that finally the value of science is being realized. I think that's one positive thing I see from this pandemic. And when I talk of science in India, usually we talk about satellites and space that always dominates, or be the missiles of DRDO. But the basic science or the science which IGIB is doing or BPT is doing never gets the popular imagination. So I think it's a breakthrough moment for Indian science and for the world science actually. And there are always questions being asked, what's the value of basic science? Globally, it has been asked, and perhaps this pandemic will answer to a large extent that Feluda did not come out just like that in 10 days or 1 month. It was the decades of research which has gone. And even the mRNA vaccines. mRNA was not discovered today, and vaccines have been developed for 20 years, the platform. This was just a catalyst. So I think at least this is a really positive thing for science. Of course, the complexity is there. And as scientists, we are always cautious when we conclude something. But here we are forced to come out in the public who wants, yes or no answer. Is this vaccine good for me? Is it, like the questions were asked, how long the response will last? Scientists take decades to answer those kind of questions. And here we are trying to answer it day in, day out. And doing science under the spotlight is very, very difficult. And when lives are at stake. And I think it's been a tremendous challenge. And to be honest, I think our scientists have done a tremendous job. Nobody thought vaccines could be developed so fast with such high efficacy. And I think we are very fortunate it has been developed. But again, like right in the beginning, I said, what good is a vaccine if people are not ready to take it? And I think that's where the science communication and awareness comes in. And I think, again, the trust of scientists is very high, fortunately. So when scientists like Dr. Anurag or Dr. Mandi or Dr. Renu Swarup go out and see and talk about the science, I think that really adds value. And I think, people trust, or Dr. Vijayaraghavan taking a stance. I think these are really positive developments. And to be proud, I think, and we have played our own small role in CSIR. And you are very right, India is a very diverse country. And what we've done is a very minuscule effort, I believe. And, we are still not able to reach the unreached. I am not lost really, because, as a science communicator the last 1 year, we've done so many webinars, but some are not able to attract the kind of people I want to come to the social media. I really, and this is a question to the panel and in general also, how do we improve our reach? This is a question which bothers me, because we are doing so much effort, but are we able to, on WhatsApp, that's where the audience is, but how do we reach them? And the attention span is very poor. If I talk for 10 minutes, nobody's going to listen to me. They'll switch the channel, right? So it's a very challenging prospect. I think we've done good work, but there's a lot more to be done. And one of the things which at CSIR with Dr. Mandi, I think we've done this regional webinars, which I think was a positive step. We did it Bengali, Assamese, and in all the languages possible to take the efforts. And I think, it's important that people know that, like Atmanirbharta, what we are talking about, people should feel proud that our Indian scientists are working, because that our scientists are not sitting idle, but actually they are doing research for COVID. And I think that's what we did at CSIR to a large extent, take our science and to show people, yes, we are sequencing, we are doing diagnostics, we develop ventilators. Because it's not just for publicity, but actually people feel proud that our scientists are working to come up with solutions. And in a simple language, again, that's a complex issue, because how do you explain genomics? And even scientists, I think, don't know the difference between a mutation and a variant. It's very difficult. And here you are, newspapers talking about 7,000 mutations and not causing alarm to the people. It's going to be difficult. There are big questions, whether vaccines are going to be effective on the variants. These are very tricky questions for which we don't have the answers. But I think the key is to keep communicating rather than less communication. More authentic communication, I think, is important. And I think usually, like I was just discussing with somebody, during public health, scientists play a role only in the lab, not so much in the upfront. But in this pandemic, you actually seen scientists taking a public health perspective, even talking about it. And I think that's a really positive step. You are very right. Will this interest sustain beyond the pandemic? I do not know. But I think we need to make efforts as scientists to keep communicating. And I think the new science policy and the scientific social responsibility policies will hopefully make it a much more formalized platform for science communication to emerge. And those are the few comments I had to make.
Thank you very much, Dr. Geeta. Any other panelists would like to respond to this round? Anybody has any comment, please welcome.
Only response to Geeta. Geeta said, how do we reach out to a wider audience? And I think, Geeta, that we need to communicate in different languages. That is one solution. And in languages they understand. These webinars are limited by their reach. There will be 1,000, 2,000, and we don't even know how many people are paying attention. They're not paying attention. We need to reach out to people and first go to them, understand what is the kind of questions they have in their mind, and then answer those questions. I think we have to move out of our own systems and our offices and go there exactly where we want to and speak to them. I think that is the only way. Otherwise, understand what they want, understand what their hesitancy is. I think that is important. There are few sects and few pockets in India who are completely negative towards vaccines, whether it is because superstition, whether it is because religious belief. There are sects and pockets like that. And we have to reach out to them, speak to them, and tell them why they need to come out of it. But that's a lot of work which we need to do, but we need to get out of our offices and reach out to them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think, as I said, more communication and regional languages and simple language. Again, I think that's a challenge which most scientists face, is communicating the results in a jargon-free and a rather simple language which people can understand. And I think these are definitely essential. I agree with your comment. Thank you.
Anybody else? Or any brief comment? If there are not any, then can we take questions from the audience if there are any questions?
Yes, please.
Dr. Paramananda, do you, if there are any questions, maybe you can take the session forward now.
Yes, ma'am. We have received some question. One is specifically for Anurag sir, a scholar India. He has specifically asked, or he or she has asked for. My question is for Anurag sir. Why are some people reluctant to take the vaccine? Maybe Shailaja ma'am can also comment after, sir. I mean, we have already discussed.
So there are 2-3 reasons for people to be reluctant. Let's take the most common one first. People think they don't need it. They think they've already been through it. They have had so much exposure. They're already immune. Second is that people are worried that the vaccine may have side effects. And the third is people who know that they need the vaccine. They are willing to get vaccinated, but they're waiting for the best vaccine. These are the 3 categories of people that I know. And I can think of plenty of people from amongst well-educated medical ones who can easily read the comparative data and say that, the mRNA vaccines are giving you 95% efficacy. There's beautiful data from in the New England Journal just maybe 2-3 days ago, showing how in Israel, the Pfizer vaccine has worked brilliantly. And they want to make sure that they take the best vaccine whenever the time comes. So, depending on 3 different types of people, these are the 3 typical things I see.
So we are moving to the next question. It's from Hemant Kumar Gautam. He has asked opinion about the current vaccine against the latest 5 mutated corona strains. It's basically against the mutated corona strains.
Shall I take it?
Yeah, sure.
So they're answers based on data and their answers based on speculation. So when you take the heavily mutated strains, how does the data come? You grow that virus in culture. You incubate with the sera taken from the blood of a vaccinated person, and you see if there is neutralization activity. Such experiments indicate there is not complete loss of neutralization, there's a reduction in neutralization, whichever vaccine class you look at. None of these things captures T-cell immunity, and T-cell immunity is not so much 3D structure dependent, but based on peptide epitopes. And the reality of immune escape will be less than what the neutralization experiments tell you. So it's an inexact science. As of now, things that give you a very high antibody response will be the least susceptible towards variant escapes. People who have mild or low antibody response will be more susceptible, and only data can be used to answer the question properly with time. Because you want proper human studies of reinfections, not in vitro cultures of viruses with blood of vaccinated people.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the next question, I think Geetawani ma'am and Shalza ma'am already addressed this, but I am repeating it. So the question is from Jyoti Singh, and she is asking, do you think that we must have a more robust communication strategy for vaccine hesitancy?
Either you go first.
Yes, I think we should. Shailaja just discussed, I think, right? So we already covered this, and Dr. Anurag also said first the underlying reasons for vaccine hesitancy could be different. But I think it's the point is the communication about the risk and the benefit, and Dr. Shailaja mentioned right in the beginning, even in the openness about the data, and those are important. That way people are reassured that the processes are followed rigorously and that the best interest of people. And I think that to a large extent answers the questions if anybody has. And again, leading by example, that's another way of addressing the vaccine hesitancy. When you see large number of leaders getting vaccinated, so they're showing that it is safe and they're taking the vaccine. And the third is obviously the talk in the media, and already we are doing all these webinars and different ways of communicating the risk and the benefit. I think these are the few ways in which one can address the vaccine hesitancy.
Dr. Paramananda, just one small intervention. So there are any questions to Dr. Varshney, maybe you can read out. He would like to leave a note.
So there are some very common type of questions. Anu has asked, is it compulsory to take vaccine?
No, I think it should remain voluntary. You can't force people to take on themselves. It is their life and they know how to enjoy it. And also, I would say that immunity level is different. So people are following different practices in terms of yoga and pranayams, in terms of food, in terms of precautions. Social vaccine, of course, is being talked about that you should keep this distance and maintain it. But I still feel as an individual, it should be left to the individual choices. Of course, the threat is that even if virus is carried by one person, you are not safe. So that we have seen in case from polio vaccine, that even if there is one carrier, you are not safe. So we need to eradicate it completely. So it has to be, but more it should come by way of acceptance rather than being forced upon. I think Anurag wants to say something. So
yes, it's an interesting situation where we agree, but for perhaps slightly different reasons. So I agree that the vaccine should not be forced because forcing rarely accomplishes anything worthwhile. I mean, people will get injected with water and you will still have things like that. On the other hand, I am not 100% sure with where the world is going with vaccination. There are very strong anti-vaxxer movements in US. In fact, some of the most educated people are the most anti-vaxxers. It's a genuine problem. At some point, people will have to realize that you get vaccinated not only for yourself, but for public safety. And even if there were a very small infinitesimal risk, you all carry it for the benefit of everybody. So for example, if a digital vaccine passport was made mandatory for international travel, for example, yellow fever vaccination is critical if you want to go to Africa, I would not have any problem even if people protested, because not getting vaccinated is your right. Demanding to be allowed to travel anywhere in the world without getting vaccinated is not your right. So with that slight demarcation, which I believe is very much in line with what Dr. Varshney also meant, I would say duties and rights are kind of the two sides of the same coin.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I belong to a very remote village of Assam, and then whenever this kind of situation arises, I get calls on phone from the village people or my school friends. Like in March, April, it was like when the vaccine will be available, and now is it safe or not? That kind of. So in that line, I have got some interesting questions. So one, this Ashish has asked, how well we are prepared to celebrate Holi? Like Holi is like coming next month, so or this month at the end, and by avoiding social contact. I think this is very relevant question. I traveled a bit last month, and I can see people gathering, not using mask and all those. So yeah, how the society? What's your view on this?
Well, let me be a pessimist here. The next outbreak is guaranteed. There is zero chance, in my opinion, that we will completely make this virus disappear. Too many people are infected. It travels and spreads too easily. Carelessness will lead to more outbreaks. While we have done well in terms of number of people vaccinated, you convert the same figure to percentage of people vaccinated, and you realize it's not only going to make even a dent in the travel potential of the virus. I would tell people, be careful. Things are not over yet. And even if you are vaccinated, the effectiveness of the Chinese vaccine, which was a killed virus vaccine, was in the range of 60%, which pretty much tells you 40% may not be working for you. Severe disease may not happen, but you may still be transmissible. So maintain care for the time being. Yeah, that's your kind of public duty more than anything else. It's not a popular statement to make, but I'll make it anyway. So, and you know, I wrote the article, "The worst is behind us." When I wrote the worst is behind us, I thought to myself, people will misinterpret it. So I made the last line, "The worst is behind us as long as we do the simple things right."
So that means there are massive challenges ahead. I mean, what is our preparedness will be the crucial question now. I mean,
whether the challenges are massive or not massive will depend heavily on what we think of our people and their ability to follow simple things.
Like SARS and MERS, whether it is the way the demand for its vaccine fallen down later, how does it, I mean, are there any other one more?
I think there are massive challenges, but nothing unsurmountable. There'll be challenges in getting the vaccine into people. There'll be challenges in doing the science, and there'll be challenges in maintaining proper behavior. All three. Thank you.
Actually, the influenza vaccine in US, they keep on doing it again and again, preparing for every 2 years. So are we prepared like that? I mean, India has that capacity. How do we improve that capacity is also another interesting question.
Madhvi, we have the capacity. We've shown that we have the capacity. All of them will be able to meet the challenge of any variation or variant which comes to India. And especially now we have shown, yes, it is possible. So we shouldn't even doubt the capacity of our scientists, especially now when they have delivered.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, we have some more. One, this $1,000,000 question, like maybe every kid is having in their mind on, and Ashish has only asked it, when everything will be back to normal. Yeah, that's a question from the masses, I hope.
The new normal is back to normal. We are fine. We are fine. We can do almost everything we want to do if we maintain the rules. We wear a mask. We maintain a distance. We wash our hands. We get ourselves vaccinated. We are back to normal. It's a new normal, but we are back to normal.
Preeti has one question. Is the present vaccine available for children below 12-year-old, and how much is safe for them?
It has not been tested in those people, and so any claim for efficacy and safety would be based on hearsay. At some point, those trials will get done, and we'll know. At this point, I would not say we can claim safety and efficacy either.
Thank you, sir. Rita has one question. How quickly could COVID-19 vaccine stop the pandemic?
Depends on the percentage you get vaccinated.
How quickly it can stop? Yeah.
Dr. Anurag, I think just answered that question. If you look at the Israel example, the cases, and Dr. Anurag Agrawal will be able to give you more details on that. The Israel example is phenomenal. Vaccination has proved that the cases can come down to almost zero. Anurag, you might want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the age group that they gave most of their vaccines to, the elderly, severe disease has gone down to nearly zero, and even infections are down to very low. The question, like I said, is percentage of people vaccinated. How many % can you do over what time? India is a billion-plus country.
Yeah.
So
the
keep that in mind.
Yeah, because to herd immunity or even to achieve the level what Israel has achieved is really a challenge. And secondly, they are using the Pfizer vaccine, which itself is above 90% efficacy. There are two things which I think you have to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Dr. Charulata has asked about the safety of the vaccines for children. Probably you
don't know safety for young children yet. Or efficacy for that matter.
Yeah, yes. Bilkisa has asked whether it will be available in the CGHS dispensary straight for beneficiaries. Maybe supply chain, yeah, they would be able to comment. Scholar India has asked which vaccine should we take? I mean, the one better Covishield.
There are only two options.
Yeah.
And there's no choice. So whichever place you go to. And they're not declaring the vaccine which you will get. So either ways, you'll sign up for a vaccination center. So there is no element of choice involved.
Thank you, sir. Anu has asked, what is meant by decision made on trust in case of vaccines?
Decision made on trust. Not 100% sure what it is, but there is a huge amount of trust in any medical decision of this scale, that people did it the right way. And that's why what Shelja talked about regarding discussion is so important. Transparency, trust, data, that's what I think Shelja was pointing out. Geeta too.
Thank you, sir. Rezi has one question. What would be the appropriate intervention for the global equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines? As of now, about 75% of the vaccine supply is cornered by about 7 countries. Do you think that waiver of IPRs and transfer of technology and know-how would be an appropriate measure? Anyone in the panel may respond.
I think Shailja probably is best equipped to look at the international position of India.
I think India is remarkably placed in terms of both as a manufacturing hub. We are the manufacturing capital of the world. And in fact, Varshini mentioned it, we are supplying vaccines to the world. 52 countries have requested vaccines from India. This is my official knowledge that I have. And we have almost committed to supplying to almost all of them over a period of time. India is very well placed in terms of both manufacturing. The single dose vaccine, which has just been given FDA approval, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has a tie-up for manufacturing with Biological E in India, and will probably, after the bridging trial is done, that is as per the requirement of the DCGI, it could be made available for. We have our own pipeline, the Zydus Cadila vaccine, which is an mRNA-based vaccine, is into the third phase and will probably be applying for emergency use authorization very quickly as well. So I don't think we need to worry about our capacity for manufacturing the vaccines. The one thing which is of concern and which is a challenge is the population of India. How quickly can we bring the vaccines to all of India and every citizen of India? That will be a challenge, simply because it is a humongous human resource capacity challenge. How many can we vaccinate in a day? How many we can, and the detailed analysis has been done. All of that has been done, and you'll be surprised at the kind of detailing which has been done by the government. And if everything works out well, we could get all of our population vaccinated very quickly, within a year and a half or something, even less.
Thank you, ma'am. Charu Burma ma'am has asked one question: why RNA-based vaccines are superior to ones made with killed virus? Probably for Anurag sir.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Why RNA-based vaccines are superior than those made with killed virus?
So if the measure of a vaccine is induction of an immune response, then mRNA vaccines seem to be inducing a very powerful immune response, partly because mRNA itself, it's an inducer of immune response. So, when you give killed virus, you have to give something called an adjuvant to make the body respond. Now, in the form of mRNA, the presence of nucleic acid itself promotes an immune response, and then the mRNA gets translated into proteins to which the immune response will occur. So it's a combination of a foreign protein plus the presence of nucleic acid, giving very, very high levels of antibody response. It's a technology India must invest in.
Thank you, sir. One more question is from Krishnanand Pandeji. He has asked when these vaccines will reach the far-flung areas, the areas away from the district headquarters.
I couldn't hear that properly. Sorry, my signal is.
When these vaccines will reach those places away from this district headquarters, maybe the remote places.
Oh, I would not know. That's very much a Ministry of Health, and I'm sure arrangements have been made. Because just like, elections are held all over the country, we have chosen vaccines that do not require very, very difficult cold chains. Other vaccines are being delivered. I'm sure so shall this.
Param, health workers in the phase 1, health workers across the country, whether they are in the remote areas of the countries, the whole panchayat system has got into place, and vaccinations have been made available. You can ask almost any district in the country, and vaccines have been made available. or the health workers in the first phase. So I don't see it not happening in the second phase as well.
Yes, ma'am. One question from my side to maybe Shailaja ma'am. So in March when all this happened, so ma'am started one mask movement kind of. So we prepared one document. I also like participated a bit in the translation and all. We translated into many different languages because mask was the only way at that time. So I think initially people are using it. Now in many places like they're a bit reluctant. So like how we can like convince or keep this going on, this mask movement, till everybody is vaccinated, or maybe even after that?
I think the fear of the disease is subsiding. When we introduced masks, the fear was huge, and almost everybody accepted it. And the Prime Minister sort of said, "Okay, everybody needs to wear the mask." And the fear, I think, really was the pull for the masks. To continue for people to wear masks, like Dr. Anurag Agarwal said, the worst is not behind us. If we do not do the simple things we are supposed to continue doing, it cannot be behind us if it cannot adhere to the simple tenets of precautions. That is paramount. And that will again come from within us. I mean, we can just say, yes, wear it, and the messaging has to go there. But the people have to understand that it is important. It's not a big deal. Just wear a mask.
So I was just other day talking to one expert. He was saying like, see next year the cases of TB might also go down because of this mask movement. I mean, you may not know how many ways it's helping our body. Maybe Geeta ma'am also could comment and do some comments at the end, kind of our communication efforts and how to convince people, how to reach out to them. Definitely regional language strategies which we use, ma'am has started. I also participated with. Those were very impactful. And then
please brief. Can you brief because Dr. Anurag Agarwal has to leave. Somebody is waiting for him. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think Dr. Shailaja has really covered it, and I think there's nothing much I can add, except that I think communication. I think that's the only message. I think the more we do it, it's better. And you are seeing in Bombay already what's happening, right? The cases are rising. So it's for people to see that what happens if you don't follow the precautions. But I also, like, sometimes I sympathize with the people, whether I know it's been a year long. It's not like 1 or 2 days, right? There is a wariness which sets in people. So I think we need to keep communicating with them, and it's really not that big deal. You know, wearing a mask, you can do 90% of the things. It's really not stopping you from doing anything in your functions. And I think lead by example. I think we all can lead by example. I think that's the best way rather than just talking. I think whenever I see somebody, I tell them, please put on the mask. Like, you know, that's, I think, the simplest thing we can do. And yeah, and thank you for the wonderful session. I think it was really engaging with the great panelists here and all of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
It's my personal thanks to you all. In fact, it's been really lively and interactive. And it's a pleasure, having interacted with you like this. And I hope to interact with you later also in person, maybe with long sessions, with 1 hour sessions, maybe with each of you.
2 hours is
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think now we don't have any formal vote of thanks. Dr. Param want to give, so please, maybe you can, if we have time, otherwise we can say bye.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a as informal discussion. I would just thank all our speakers for their precious time, and I would like to thank our audiences also. They for their precious 2 hours, and then they have asked questions and they were completely engaged. Most importantly, I'd like to thank our organizing team, including the IT and then our design and all those who have helped us to organize this. And a special mention to our director ma'am and Madhvi ma'am for having this idea and then planning everything and then like arranging such a nice kind of interactions. So thank you all. Would love to do some follow-up sessions in the near future.